Hello and welcome to our channel. Get me someone who can sell. I'm Olga Pichnenko and I'm the founder of Revenue Hire, where we help find sales talent for growing organizations. And we know how to vet the good salespeople and so the company can grow. And today on my show, I've got the one and only Dr. John Oberg. And is it okay if I call you John
I think
or
you
Dr.
should.
Oberg?
That's what you've always called me.
Okay.
No, John's great.
On screen, maybe I should go with something else. Okay, so John is my mentor and the teacher, and everything I learned about kind of how to hire salespeople and how to sell, he taught me that, and I continue to evolve and grow with his guidance. He's also helping me as an advisor right now with my company. So I have so many awesome things to say about John, and we'll cover a lot of them. But one of the reasons I wanted him to be on the show is he is the example of somebody when you talk to them, you don't even feel like you're talking to a salesperson. He truly cares about helping with whatever you need help with. And he sort of sprinkles that in his career. And we'll start with the beginning, kind of how you started. And then I want to make sure we address kind of how it all evolved and how you're helping people these days with what you're doing. So if that's okay, do you want to say anything before
Sure.
I kind of get in?
I'm ready to dive in. So whatever questions you've got, hit me. I'm ready.
All right, let's do it. So tell us kind of what interested you about sales and how did you think you'll be good at it? Kind of what was your origin path?
Yeah, I mean, it didn't really occur to me that I was going to try to get into sales in particular. I started my first job in sales was selling Cutco cutlery as a college student, and I was fairly successful at it enough that I ended up having more than 1,000 people that worked for me as a division head, where I had 5 states of responsibility, 12 different office locations, and enough sales to get into the company's Hall of Fame. So they have a picture of a portrait of me in their manufacturing facility, along with a number of other people who are part of the Hall of Fame. And but yeah, so it was a really great experience. I was really fortunate to have some really incredible mentors there. Scott Dennis, Amar DeVay, and make some amazing friends along the way. And really, there's so many lessons from that 11-year stretch when I was there. But the thing that sticks with me today is role playing. I role play with my family, my kids. I role play with you. I role play with clients. I role play with everybody about just the situation comes up, how do you handle it? And so we'll practice, and it's almost like a professional athlete who gets into the batting cage before they go into the game, or they shoot free throws before a basketball game, or they practice footwork before a football game, or a professional musician who warms up using scales before they play and they perform. And so if the elite professionals, in my experience, aren't scared to practice, they aren't scared to warm up, and people who are amateurs, it's like me on the golf course. I don't warm up very well. I just kind of grip it and rip it, and my score shows it. It's horrible. Um,
Wait, hold on.
so
So there's so much to go from just here. So how do you start at Cutco? Because that's such a for those of you who don't know, kind of how to describe like Cutco. Like it's mostly door-to-door sales where you have to have super thick
it's well,
skin.
yeah, it's not door to door. It's actually direct sales. So it's in-home sales. So you do go into
Okay.
people's homes and sell, but it's direct sales. And so you start with a warm market, and you get referrals, and they're very, very successful at referral based selling. And they're really great at teaching people how to go through and ask for referrals, and they're really great at teaching people how to present themselves. And the professional development for a young person at Cutco, I can't say that I know of a better program anywhere in the world. I would say that a similar program, I would put it up there with, like, the US military in terms of professional development. Like, that's how good the program is.
So when you started there as a sales rep, how long did it take for you to get noticed and move up the ladder?
I think I can't remember the number, but I took something like 15 or 16 promotions over an 11-year period. And so now promotions aren't like new jobs. Sometimes it's just moving from one level of sales to
Right.
the next level of sales to the next level of sales, and then into management. But within a year, I was doing some part-time management, and so I was very quickly interested in the management of salespeople. And that's where I cut my teeth with managing salespeople as well. And again, I role played a lot. Like, I used to call my mentors all the time, be like, "Hey, I'm trying to work with this salesperson about this issue," and they would role play with me. It was great.
So how did you so you obviously liked working there. It's like what was your favorite part about it? Like what did you like about it and what are some of the things that you did not like when you first got
I
into it?
mean, impacting people was the best part of the job. I mean, I can't even tell you the number of stories where I believed in someone maybe more than they believed in themselves for a moment, and I shared that with them, and they built their confidence and got to believe in themselves. And some people stayed there for, a summer or, a month or two, and some people stayed there for years and decades, and they have, a career sales program right now that's really amazing. And, so I really love how the organization looks to impact people, and they do such a deliberate and wonderful job of it. It's amazing, and I think it's a
So
really great experience for any young person looking for that type of confidence builder.
how would you say like most people that they hire they stay, or was it a pretty high turnover in terms of how many people could stomach kind of being in the sales? Like is it like how many people would stay? Like let's say you hire 10, how many would stay on the general like
Yeah,
on the
I I don't have the statistics anymore, but it's sales is a higher turnover role in general, but so is retail. So is I
really?
mean, oh yeah, I mean, in the healthcare industry right now, the turnover rates are astronomical. Like I think you see turnover lots of places. So the reality is that the people who were really committed to the program, they did well. I think some people came in and realized maybe selling wasn't for them, and that's totally fine. And I get that.
So that's where I want to kind of ask you more questions. How do you know? Because you're hiring a lot of people out of college, right? Maybe they're still in college. Maybe, maybe they're somewhere in the middle of the career. How would you know after a couple maybe hires, like who would make it, who would not make it? Do you have any tips for interviewing and picking or selecting kind of sales reps for
Yeah,
something, for a role like
and
that?
I'll pull this away from like the Cutco experience and use like my broader experience. But I think anytime you're hiring someone, you want to evaluate someone's competency for the job, and then and you've heard this before, but then you want to evaluate their cultural fit. And one of the big mistakes I see people making is they want to evaluate the cultural fit first, and they want to
Hmm.
evaluate competency second. And the argument for doing that is that cultural fit is more important. And it may be true. I think I could definitely get behind the argument that the cultural fit is more important. But having said that, I don't believe that people can effectively evaluate competency if they are already emotionally connected culturally. And so even though cultural fit may be more important, I believe it should always be done secondarily. Competency should be measured first.
And when you say competency, for those that may be hearing for the first time, what does that mean to you?
Oh, look, I think, Dave Curlin is the very best in the business when it comes to measuring sales competency. And so, I think that the vast majority of what I learned about sales competency assessment, I learned from Dave or from Dave's organization, Objective Management Group. And it really is about what are the skills that somebody needs, and these are my words, not his, but what are the skills somebody needs for the particular sales role that they're going to be doing? And then you want to understand what mindset they have to have, like what belief systems are going to either support or take away from their success as a salesperson. And I think you also want to be able to measure somebody's ability to prioritize what's most important, and then also their just work ethic in general. And I think assessing someone's work ethic has a lot to do with behavioral interviewing and asking questions about how they've handled work ethic in the past. It's not about how you would work in the future. Everyone knows how to ask questions about how you would work in the future. It's asking questions about how did you work. And so I think work ethic is a learned trait.
Mhm. Absolutely. So when you hired, when somebody has a track record, obviously it's easier to ask questions about the past. But when you're hiring salespeople that don't have track record, let's say they're students or they're just coming into sales, they don't even know what they like sales. What are some of the questions or things that you're looking for in the person, when they don't have that experience yet?
Well, let's stick with work ethic for just a minute. Like work ethic is really easy to measure outside of sales. Like I don't care if someone got straight A's necessarily. I want to know how hard they had to work at getting those grades. Or one of my, favorite things was like if somebody was an Eagle Scout. Like I'm not a Boy Scout, never was a Boy Scout, definitely was not an Eagle Scout, but I knew exactly what it took for someone to get that level of recognition. And despite what someone may think of that organization, I was actually not interested in any of the politics or any, I was interested in what work did that person do to get what they got, right? So if somebody, received the bronze palm as a Girl Scout, like I knew what that meant for the young woman who had gone through and achieved that particular level of success. And so I think, and a lot of people don't recognize how that can be done poorly in interviewing. Like I know organizations that have said hire athletes because they've been successful in
Right.
athletics. Well, I think if someone's worked hard at athletics, that checks the work hard box, but that doesn't mean they've checked all the other boxes. So I still think
Right.
I love people who've been very successful in athletics because they've worked hard is a great box to check, but it's only one of the boxes that needs to be checked in going through the interviewing process. And otherwise you get some kind of some false positives as you make your assessments.
So you rose really high up at Cutco. So you were managing, you said like what, around 1,000 people at some point?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it had different numbers of people. I was a division manager, so I had a number of district managers and branch managers that worked underneath me and assistant managers underneath them. And yeah.
So if somebody wants to hire somebody or spot you, because a lot of CEOs watch our shows, right? Watch our show. What would you recommend to them to look for to hire somebody? I know no one is like John Oberg, but somebody similar to you. What are some of the traits that you would look for, looking back to give advice on somebody who will be growing
Yeah.
with the company as the company evolves?
I mean, for CEOs, I think it's really important to understand, first of all, what you're looking for before who you're looking for, right? It's if I want someone who's fantastic at playing the clarinet, then I need someone who actually plays the clarinet. I don't want to say I'll take anyone who can sing. Like just because you can sing doesn't mean you can play the clarinet. And so they're both musicians, right? And so
Right.
not a salesperson is not a salesperson is not a salesperson. And I think people who've never been in sales for their career may not understand that a salesperson might be very successful in one organization, but maybe not as successful in another organization, maybe even in the same industry for very understandable reasons. And so I think the first step is getting really clear about what the CEO needs based on where they are in the organization, right? So if they're a brand new CEO, they've only made, 20, 25 sales, they might need somebody who's far better at business development and figuring out product market fit. They might need somebody more senior than that. Or if they're a sales executive as a CEO who knows their stuff, they might need someone to come in and support them. So
Mhm.
strategy matters, right? You can't just get a good salesperson.
Right. Because when you got into Cutco, it's already established organization. There was already some kind of process and things in place that you just moved on and moved up. So if you were just starting with a
Yeah.
startup, you may not have gotten to managing 1,000 people necessarily,
Oh,
maybe.
I can tell you without a doubt, I would not have been as successful in an unstructured program because all of the learning that happened during that period, I mean, I couldn't even begin to recount all of the learning in an hour-long conversation with you. Like just the number of books that I was encouraged to read on topics not only of sales, but of self-improvement and personal productivity and just bettering myself and financial acumen and I mean, there's so many things that I got better at along the way. And so I think um, trying to learn all of that in a trial and error method, it takes longer. And I wouldn't have gotten that far in a lifetime, let alone
Right.
11 years. And so, no, so I think that anyone who's new to sales and wants to learn about sales, I think Robert Kiyosaki in his book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad said it really well. Go work for 2 years in an organization that has an amazing sales program. And he talked about like Xerox. I don't know much about their sales program today, or he talked about IBM,
Mhm.
which still has a great sales program today. And there's so many great organizations that have sales training programs with a way of kind of moving up in the program. There's lots of them. So if someone
Well,
wants to get great in sales, go work in a great sales organization that really understands sales training.
this is very important what you just said. So when CEOs come to me and they go, I just want somebody hungry, and somebody who can sell. I'm like, well, do you have a training in place? How are you going to support this person? So what you were just saying, it just sort of reiterates the fact that don't hire a newbie who doesn't know what they're doing because they're hungry if you can't provide support or training or onboarding for them that will set up for success. Did I hear that right?
I think that's right. But there's hope because I think there's so many different ways to get a training program into place, even for small companies that don't have a lot of resources. You can outsource that to people. Adam Boyd was on your show. If you haven't seen him speak, you should definitely go watch the Adam Boyd show. He's amazing. My friends over at Lucian, like Aaron Prickle, do a really great job of this. I think there's a whole network of different types of methodologies and people that you can bring in to do that type of support for an organization. Full disclosure, I use Aaron Prickle and his team to help with some of my team where I work now to give some of that training and support. Even though I know how to do all of this stuff, I was honest enough to know that I wasn't going to have the time in my day as a CEO to do some of those things. So I hired them to come in and do it.
Yep. So you identified your hole, like what was the holes in whatever you're trying to accomplish, and go and find those,
Right.
but don't put all that weight on the new hire, because that's you setting them up to fail, basically, if you don't have that set up.
Which is then setting up the company to fail too, right? You're setting up the company
Right.
as well. Right.
That is so important. So how do you go from going from Cutco and managing a lot of people to now going to how would you call it? Sandler marketplace with the
Yeah.
Sandler franchise?
Market sense. Yeah, there was a bunch of steps in between there. So, first I went back to get my MBA, and when I was in my MBA
Okay.
program, I was studying management of technology, and I was studying policy and planning, and so I got a chance to help with the commercialization of technology out of some of the nuclear laboratories, working with one of my mentors, Dr. Steve Walsh. He was really good to me in helping me understand how technology goes to market and how there's different ways it goes to market. And so I spent a couple of years working through and learning how you take things to market. And it's a lot more than just selling, obviously. Product development and marketing, and then the rest of the MBA, I learned how to run a business. And then I tried to run a company. I worked with a couple of technology people. We wrote the patents for credit card processing on a mobile phone before smartphones. So we're like back when there was flip phones, we were helping people process credit cards via text message. And we were too early. Like we raised a bunch
Yeah.
of money. We were too early. The CEO of that company, which was me, didn't run the company as well as I could have, and I flew the company into the ground. I learned a lot of hard lessons during that period, and yeah, and after that, a friend of mine asked me to help at a private equity firm. It was a very small private equity firm called a Search Fund, to help turn around a manufacturing firm, which we did successfully. And then I landed at Market Sense, as and Market Sense is a Sandler Training franchise. And so there I did a lot with sales training, sales management, and I was doing a lot of work with CEOs of organizations too, was related to scaling and growth, and got into governance,
Well,
and did that for a while.
and so some of the questions I had about that was, first of all, I know it's not very easy to get a job at Market Sense, because you had to basically demonstrate that you were good. I mean, for those of you who don't know, Sandler is a sales. How would you describe Sandler, first of all? Kind of what's your take on
It's a
Sandler?
sales methodology, and there's lots of sales methodologies out there. A lot of them are very, very effective. I think having any methodology is better than no methodology. I liked Sandler because there was a lot of like psychological underpinning that was very sound and functional,
Hmm.
and it was really well done, and it felt really good to be in the sales role with somebody as a consultant. It didn't feel like the kind of stereotypical used car sales thing that people talk about that they don't like. It was the opposite of that. And so I really liked that they call it having a disarmingly honest conversation. And I really love that philosophy. I still love that philosophy. I think it's great. We still use that same philosophy in the companies I work with today. And so, even though I'm not a Sandler trainer and haven't been a Sandler trainer for a long time, I really, really am committed to that um, very humanistic approach that was put forward by the founder of Sandler, who's since passed away. But I have a lot of
This,
respect for the organization.
and this is where I think it's important to talk about this, because Sandler helped organizations in various industries. So, I mean, there could be technology, there could be healthcare, there could be, I mean, my business was translations. Like, there's all these different things. And somehow you were able to help all of those companies and all of those industries, which, I don't want to lead the witness here, but sounds like the industry sometimes may not matter as much as people want to believe that it matters when it comes to having sales leadership or whatnot. I'm not saying it's not important, but kind of tell us, like, were there common threats between CEOs, or did you enjoy working with some industries better than others, or maybe some were easier than others, or maybe it was all like, this is the framework and it works across, you know, all industries?
Yeah,
What do you
I,
take? What's your take?
I, I mean, when I went into Sandler, I went in and read a lot of the underlying science that isn't talked about at Sandler as often. It's talked about, but just not as often. And so I really wanted to understand the human behavior part of it. Like, how do you help people change behavior? How do you help organizations change behavior? And so I think that if you were to draw a thread throughout my entire career, it would be that I'm really interested in human behavior. Like, that's the thing that I'm most interested in. How do you help people get what they want? Right. And someone told me, I don't remember who said this to me, but it's like, if you help enough people get what they want, you'll get what you want. And so I try to really help people figure out what they want. And so there were some concepts in Sandler that really spoke to me, like no is okay. Like when someone says no, you just accept no for an answer and move on down the road. And, funny story about that. My wife and I went on a first date and I asked her on a second date and she said no. And I was like, I accept. And went on down the road. And we didn't talk again for 6 months. And we only talked again because we ended up at the same party with a mutual friend. And it was like a year of showing up at those parties where I finally said, I'm going to ask again. But and I know there's a lot of salespeople thinking, well, but you have to ask again. Yeah, and I get that. I think there's a place for being persistent, but I think there's also a place for understanding when someone says no, that you could be wasting your time if someone's not ready right now. Doesn't mean you
Well, you
shouldn't be
talk you
marketing to them or talking to them, but
right. You taught me that as long as you've got a full pipeline coming in, if it's a no, it's a no. It's good to have a no than nothing. And so that's good to move on and never just like, oh, I need to close you because there's more coming all the time. And it's okay if
right.
somebody, says
When they
no.
don't, doesn't mean you don't market to that person, doesn't mean you don't continue to stay in contact with them, doesn't, and in my world, it also meant that you tried to find a way to help them, even if it wasn't helping you. One of the best salespeople I've ever met is here in Austin is John Weaver. I have just an immense amount of respect for John and all the things he's done in his career. And he shared with me a book called The Go Giver. And I read The Go Giver, years after being involved with Sandler, and I was like, this is such a great book to describe what I believe, which is how do you add value to somebody else's day? Like I was convinced that I wanted to be the best business conversation that any prospect would have with me. Even if they didn't buy from me, it was going to be the best business conversation they had. Like they were going to get value just from talking to me.
You delivered every time. On that because so what you said is behavior. So human behavior is the common thread between all industries, all sides of
For
the
me,
company.
yeah.
There's always going to be some like that's what's going to be there all the time. So when we look at that, and you're the pro at this, these days, if you understand that, then how does that help you change things? Kind of when it comes, especially obviously it comes to sales, but there's just so many beliefs and mindsets and bad habits and just accumulates and it's sometimes hard to see what's what's the baggage that you're carrying and how to change that
Yeah.
behavior without even knowing that you need to change that. So I don't know if that's a clear question, but like how how do you use that to change things? Like what's your secret?
Yeah, I think I'm clear about what I want to change. I think that's important is knowing what I want to change and then finding the places that I can change it. So today I run two companies. I run a consulting firm, and I have lots, clients that I consult with on very specific issues. And then I run a medical practice, which doesn't seem like they would fit together, but they do fit together. They're both working on human behavior change. In the medical practice, we help people who have type 2 diabetes change behavior. And this has been a big problem for healthcare for a very long time. And I got very frustrated that this was such a big problem in healthcare for a very long time. I decided to go back and do all of the academic work to figure out how to solve the problem. And we've done it. We had a pilot study where we had 50 patients who had, type 2 diabetes for years, wasn't controlled. And of those 50 patients, we got 49 of them into control in 12 weeks and kept them in control for 2 years with no hospitalizations. And if any medical doctor was to listen to this, they'd drop their jaw and be like, wow, how did you do that? And the answer is we helped them change their behavior in a way that was sustainable. In the same way that I was helping salespeople and sales managers and CEOs change their behavior in sustainable ways when I was consulting at Market Sense. In the same way that I help CEOs and boards of directors and executives change their behavior in sustainable ways today in my consulting practice. And we work with company. I work with one of the largest organizations in the world as a client for a long time. I've worked with you know very small companies as well. The thread for me is who's willing to change, who's ready to change, right? And we can assess for how ready somebody is to change.
So,
And then then for me, how big an impact are they going to have in the world? Like that's my personal criteria. If someone comes to me and says, "Hey, I want you to help me," um, but they aren't going to make a big enough impact in the world, like that's one of my criteria that I might refer them to somebody else, but um, yeah.
so when this is so brilliant on so many levels because we humans want to know, like, tell me what to do, right? And I'll do it. But you don't really think about what is this, how am I wired? How did I wire myself, over the last 10, 20, 30 years? And how is that in the way? Because if I'm going to try to do what you're doing, but my mindset is screwed up, um, it's not going to work. Right.
Right.
So when you're interviewing somebody, like how do you interview for that? Like for change, like let's say you're interviewing sales, here we're here for salespeople, for sales talent. So how would you know that someone is open to change and will change? Because obviously that's one of the most important things when it comes to
Yeah, I mean,
having sales team.
in the world of psychology. So my doctorate is in social work, right? And so the readiness for change is one of the things that can be assessed for a person. Like it's called trans-theoretical theory, but you don't have to be a psychologist or a social worker to do that. Like you can talk about like, hey, where have you changed in the past, and what led up to that, and what made you want to change, and then, well, okay, so then why do you want to change now? Like, and what are you not willing to do to change? I always want to know what people aren't willing to do because that tells me a lot about what they are willing to do. Someone said to me just this week, uh, Peter Drucker was like the father of modern management, and he said on more than one occasion, there's a big difference between being interested and being committed. Right? If you're interested, yeah, it may not go your way. If you're committed, you're going to make sure it goes your way. And so, being ready to change is about commitment. It's about no other path. And so I'll give you an example from my own life that's maybe a little bit personal. In 2021, in November of 2021, I was on a trip, and I have a picture in a bathing suit where I weighed 229 pounds. I'm 5'10". That's not good. From a weight perspective, as a healthcare provider, I can tell you that's not healthy for me. And I said, okay, I'm done with this. I'm gonna drop the weight. And in 2023, I was able to drop 20 pounds. And so I got down to 209 pounds, but that wasn't my goal. And I sat down with my doctor, and he's like, hey, let's just be honest. That wasn't your goal. Your goal was to be like 170, and we're not there. So something has to change. And I got recommitted. And so then from December 15th until today, I'm down another 39 pounds. I weighed in at 171 this morning, and I followed all of the change management stuff that I talked to my patients about. I followed all the change management stuff that I talked to my clients about as consultants, and I got help. Right? It wasn't just me. Like I publicly committed to the people that were going to support me. I got
Hmm.
professional help. In this case, it was a weight issue, so I talked to my doctor. I talked to a physical trainer. I talked to people who I knew were going to professionally and expertly support me. Right? So it's not enough to have a plan. You have to have a plan developed by experts that's committed to by the person, and then you have to have intermittent or ongoing, you know, support for that. A community of people around you. I did a TED talk on this around chronic disease, right, in the process, but it's the same for behavior change for anybody. It's not just enough to have a plan, you have to have an expert plan.
I like the analogy of chronic disease when it comes to even business, because a lot of times when companies come to us, they go, well, I hired three sales teams and they're all wrong, da da da. And it's like, well, you are the common denominator. So, but no one wants to hear that. I mean, I remember when I started working with you, I was on my third wrong sales team, and you were the first one who had the guts to tell me that maybe you should start looking in what you were doing and change what you were doing. And so that's one thing to say that, right? And be committed to it. But another thing is the process. So I know you've kind of described the process, but how would you bring that to business? Like
I think you have to know how to do
internally,
it,
like,
right? Like, yeah, well, that goes back to the expert plan, right? Like, I think you have to have an expert plan, not just a plan. And so you want to find people, it's, I was talking to some people yesterday, and I said, just because, in this case, I was talking to some doctors, and I said, just because you're a doctor doesn't mean that you're a great educator. Just because you're a good salesperson doesn't make you a good sales manager. Just because you're a good sales manager doesn't mean you know how to build the entire program for selling, like unless you've done that before and been taught how to do that. And so and you can figure it out, and you may have to do some trial and error, but at the end of the day, I think having an expert plan helps a ton. And if you're not going to have an expert plan and you're going to use trial and error, then you should expect it's going to take longer than. And by the way, that might be the only affordable thing for a small startup in some cases is I have to use trial and error. I've got to read books. I've got to figure it out. And kudos to to going that direction. But experts are going to help speed things up in everything that you do.
So let's say you hired somebody, hired, a salesperson, a business development person, company has sold, 20, 30 things, and the CEO is sick and tired of doing the sales themselves. They hired this person,
Yeah.
but there's obviously gaps, right? So the CEO may or may not know what to do. They know how much revenue they want to get, right? So they know what the star is. The salesperson has done this before, but there's obviously a lot of kind of gaps in between. So what would be your advice? Because I know you've done this a lot at Sandler, like
Yeah.
people hiring people, and then I was like, well, what am I supposed to do now? So what would be your advice for the CEO to make sure that they are giving what
Yeah.
the salesperson needs?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is I heard you say was, the CEO is sick and tired of selling. That all like step number one, solve that problem, right? Like if the CEO is going to come in and kind of diminish sales, and I've seen this happen with a number of CEOs over the years. I saw one CEO that the door he sent his salespeople through every morning on the way to their desk said no soliciting on it.
Oh, ugh,
Now,
yikes.
when I worked in a consulting firm that dealt with sales management and sales training, we had a sign on our door that said no bad soliciting,
I need to put
right?
that on our door.
So so the first thing is make sure the CEO's head is on straight. I had another company that the CEO said we don't need a sales team. Like we're just gonna have good products. I said Apple has maybe some of the best products in the world, arguably in their industry, and they still have salespeople. So I don't. I mean, I
that's
think
that's
so.
the first red flag. The sick and tired is the
Yeah,
first red flag
yeah. So
of the
that was the
CEO.
first.
Okay.
Now, but we were trying to get at is like how should a CEO look at what needs to happen in their sales kind of function? And look, that's a complicated problem depending on industry and sales cycle and lots of questions I typically ask. But here are the things I generally am trying to understand. Like I want to understand how much energy someone needs to spend as a salesperson in prospecting. How much of their energy do they have to spend moving deals through the pipeline? I want to understand what does it take to close a deal that works for the operations of the company? Like, how do I close it clean so it can be delivered in a way that the customers can be happy at the end? So I want to know those things for sure. Then I want to understand how much account management needs to be happening in terms of ongoing service for that particular customer set. And then I want to understand like what type of industry network would or would not be helpful for that salesperson. So those are the first five things I kind of want to measure out and see like how much time each one of those things might take to kind of put the job description into the right order so it's working.
Mhm. 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 But once they hired them, because everybody expects the miracle, right? Oh, the savior is here. We hired the salesperson. Now they're gonna sell a million gazillion dollars, and we'll live happily ever after. And that's very rarely it happens without a good onboarding, without good accountability, without a good kind of management system. So, what would be your advice? Would it be to go get something like Sandler where they can help them, or is there like
Sh- sh-
any
Yeah,
other
sure. I mean,
path?
of course,
Like,
yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, my friends at Sandler, I think, are great at what they do, and I would encourage anybody to look at them. I think but again, from a like, what needs to happen for the support of the salesperson, there definitely needs to be a good recruiting program to make sure the person's being set up for success. There definitely needs to be a training program that trains people not just on the product of the company, but also trains them on the sales process of the company and on whatever methodology they are going to use. Hopefully, they're using some methodology, right? But whatever the methodology is, making sure everyone's using the same methodology. Then there's got to be some type of like mentorship so that someone is being and motivation, right? So in other words, making sure that the sales management, whether it's the CEO or a sales manager, whoever it is doing something to grab the motivations of the salesperson, engage them in their commitment so they're giving their best. Like if you want people to be operating at their best, there's a mentorship and motivation piece that should be happening on a regular basis between all management and the employees. There's coaching. This is the most underdone part of sales management in my experience, is just making sure that coaching is happening every day. And a huge amount of time should be happening between some level of management and the person that's selling, so that there's role playing. And when I'm coaching, at least what I'm looking for is, am I going to coach a skill set? Am I going to coach a mindset? Am I going to coach prioritization, or am I going to coach work ethic? Right. And so
Hmm.
any one of those four things might be up for, or if there's something else I've got to coach on culture or whatever, that's fine. But really I want to make sure that I understand in the pipeline, what's the next step from the prospect's perspective? What's the due date? Who's responsible? But most pipelines don't have that level of rigor in their pipeline. It's something like the salesperson is like, oh, it sounds pretty good and things are looking pretty good, and I'm going to catch up with them next week, and it's just really loose, and that's not great pipeline management. So coaching requires a level of um, coaching, making sure that someone's applying the skills that they're expected to apply. And then the fifth thing, so right, so we had recruiting, training, mentorship and motivation, coaching. The fifth one, of course, would be accountability, and making sure there's accountability to that salesperson, right? So they're actually doing the activities and getting the results they should be getting. And so if some level of management isn't providing that, at least those five parts of support, it's going to be harder for a salesperson to be effective. Not impossible, but certainly more difficult.
Right, because the higher than that's it. That's the recipe for disaster. There's
Yeah,
got to be the other two
yeah.
things that you talked about, the methodology and the management piece. So you said it so
Mhm.
well. Could not have said it better. So when you talk about coaching, that's a very, you said it should be done daily. So what if a CEO is not a good coach, or they don't even know what that means? What would be the advice for that?
Get
How do
coaching,
you become a better coach?
get
Get
coaching,
coaching. Okay.
get coaching, and then learn how to coach. And then if you need to hire a coach, you can hire. But I'm not. And look, I've been an executive coach. I've been trained as an executive coach. I know what executive coaching is. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about managerial coaching. Okay. So executive coaching is about like, hey, you have the answer inside of yourself, and let's talk about how to get from here to. That's not this. When I'm talking about sales coaching, I'm talking about like, when I'm coaching someone through a pipeline review, it's like, hey, that's great. At the end of the conversation, what did the prospect tell you they wanted to have happen next? Okay, what words did they use? And then what did you say? What did they say? What did you say? What did they say? Right? When a deal gets stalled, like, hey, how are you going to unstick that deal? Like, what are you going to say? Let's role play. And we role play that. You and I have role played sales conversations. I mean,
I hate and I
regularly.
love it at the same time. This is great.
Yeah.
Yeah, ring ring.
And by the way, I role play conversations, right? I think the best people in the world role play. Like the experts want that practice. They want to sharpen the edge and they want to be great at that. And so, I role played in my very earliest days of Cutco as a warm up to all the phone calls I was going to make. Before my day would get start with another salesperson, I'd role play with managers. I do it today with clients. I do it today with peers and mentors. Like, pre-call planning, like it's a really important set of preparation. And so coaching is a lot about making sure that you're letting people practice those skills. And so like when I'm in the sales management hat on with a salesperson, I will play the role of the salesperson while the salesperson can play the role of the prospect, so they can feel what it's like. And then we'll debrief it, and then we'll flip roles. And I know, you've been on the other side of this conversation. You know that it can be uncomfortable, right?
Very. Yep.
And
But
and
that's
and
how
you
you know
know that
it's
I
changing.
well, and you know that I will be willing to play the hard part, right? Like, I'll do the hard part, then I'll do the easy, like, the hard part's the salesperson's part, the easy part's the prospect part, right? Like, and you know me well enough to know that I put guardrails up around coaching, right? Like, hey, if we're gonna role play, we can't like switch the customer we're thinking about in our mind halfway through the role play. We've got to get all the way through one situation and then plan what's going to happen next, um, so that we can actually get to the next role play, right?
Right.
So
Yeah. No. And that's if the CEO is scared to role play because they're not being coached, like how are they going to help their salesperson or their sales team or whatever it is that it is.
Did,
So
did you
when it
see how
comes to
did you see how I just coached my son with my eyes?
I
I
figured
told him I was
something
going to be on a call. I told him I was going to be on a call and not to
I
make noise. And then he came in, he grabbed ice. You probably heard that too. And so I just gave him the old look like, and now he's giving me the what? And I'm like, I'll go coach him later. Like, hey man, when I say don't make noise, what I mean is don't. So look, coaching happens all the time. It happens at home. It happens at work. It happens everywhere. So he's going to close the door now
no,
like it
and
didn't happen. It's funny.
it never stops. So
But here's the
when
key.
we
He
get
just smiled at
requests,
me. So he just smiled. He knew I wasn't mad at him. I was just correcting him. Like
right,
it's a blameless
right.
environment, right? Like that. I think that's important for like if we're going to really grow and learn and change behavior, we have to have a blameless environment, right? It's an
Well,
environment of learning.
and this is yeah, and this is where it leads me to kind of my next part of the conversation is that many companies think accountability is how you manage. You taught me that there's like those other four pieces that happened before, which I
Yeah.
had no idea before. You taught me that. And now that you kind of just describe that, because accountability, like you said, once there's guardrails, accountability happens a lot easier. You don't have to have as many conversations because you're doing all these things along the way. So when you were at Sandler, because again, I know right now you have clients across all kinds of industries, but when you were coaching CEOs or working with CEOs at Sandler across different industries, what did you notice? Why did some of them grow the companies and why did somebody did not grow the company? Like what were the similarities when it comes to growing sales that help somebody grow their business and they just stayed at the same level? Kind of
Yeah, I think
what did you notice?
there's some part of that that has to do with like product market fit and making sure that you are ready to scale when you're ready to scale. And so I think that's part of it's having product market fit. But then having systems and processes that are repeatable is a really important part of scalability. Like um, I learned very early in my career that even though I was a great salesperson, there was going to be more sales that happened if I managed salespeople than if I was a salesperson because there's only so many hours in a day and only so many sales calls I could run. And so if you want to scale a business that requires, you know, on the sales side of things, having repeatable processes, and that means having, sales management processes as well. If you've got 10 salespeople all trying to run 10 different methodologies and 10 different ways of doing things, it becomes really difficult for a sales manager to help the salespeople help each other grow in terms of productivity, grow in terms of revenue output, grow in terms of better gross margins. Like it's just hard. And so having systems and processes in place is really, really important. And then I will say this, almost every challenge that I got involved with in an organization, the root cause, not every time, but most every time led back to some challenges we had with management. There was something management was doing that wasn't helping the process. In some cases, it was hurting the process. And so fixing that foundation is really important to get it in. That, and again, I've been a good manager on days of my career, and I've been a bad manager on days of my career. That doesn't excuse an employee from not doing their part. So I'm not trying to make
Right.
excuses for people, but I do think that management has to look in the mirror and recognize where they're helping the process forward and where they might be neutral and where they might be hurting the process. And so I'll give you one great example. In coaching, we talked about the fact that you coach people for skill, you coach for mindset, you coach for prioritization, and you coach for work ethic. Disciplining somebody works really well when there's a work ethic problem, but disciplining works really poorly when there's a mindset problem. Discipline works really poorly when there's a skill set problem. Discipline sometimes works well when there's a prioritization problem, but not as often as you'd think. And so discipline only works in some circumstances. And so if someone mistakes accountability for just discipline, that's the only tool in their bag, they better go find the rest of the tools, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it goes back again to that behavior change, right? It's like if somebody only knows discipline as the way to change things, and they're trying to grow organization, no wonder they're going to have a turnover. So, so how can people be more aware of that? Do you have any tips on like how can somebody who's watching this see like where exactly is the problem or like if they're not getting the results that they want? Do you have a framework that you use for yourself, like quickly identify what the problem is, or do you just work with a coach or have somebody
I'm
being honest with you?
I'm a lifelong learner, right? And so as a lifelong learner, there's some things that I do. I try to always keep 1 to 3 people in my life that I'm mentoring as a mentor, and I learn a lot from the people that I mentor. And then I try to find, 1 to 3 people who'll be mentoring me at any given time in my life, and having those mentors is a really, really important thing. And I think mentorship, you get a really clean mirror, um, about, people who are willing to say things to you that other people might not be willing to say. And so I think mentorship is a big one. And then I've kept every assessment that I've ever taken in my career, and I look back at those things, not every day, not every week, not every month, and maybe once a year, right? I'll go look at one of them and say, okay, like what, and I have goals for myself every year, and I want to be a lifelong learner, right? Like that's one of my goals is to be a lifelong learner. It's more a way of life, I guess, at this point. But I'm reading, I'm taking classes, I'm asking questions, I'm curious. So I think developing curiosity and being some type of lifelong learner has really made a difference for me, and I encourage that for other people too.
Well, I keep hearing one common theme that you keep talking about throughout the whole time I've been talking, and that's, impacting people, um, making a difference in their lives. And it sounds like you've been doing that when you first started in sales, and now that you have so many people that you advise, companies, there's people who work underneath. Were you always like that? That impact was part of who you are, or do you feel like you've kind of matured into that?
I told myself that I was trying to impact people for the better early in my career, and I really did mean it, but I didn't understand that I wasn't executing that very, very well. And what I mean by that is that there was a period of my career where I was much more likely to objectify someone to help them get what they want so that I would get what I want. And that was not healthy. It wasn't good. And I still really wanted people to have what they wanted. But if I was being really honest with myself, in most cases, I wanted that so that I would get what I wanted. And when I was able to make that flip at one point, and there was a number of things in my life that happened that had me really evaluating that deeply. And it was not the easiest part of my life. It was a very tough part of my life. I realized that it didn't have to be so that I would get what I want. Like I could genuinely help other people and that was enough. And I recognized in that moment that there were a lot of people that helped me get to where I was that never got something in return for me. It wasn't like this quid pro quo. They just helped me. And so when I got to a place in my life where I could pay that forward and genuinely not consider what was in it for me, then lots of things came back to me. In fact, even more came back to me. But I wasn't doing it so that I would get more, right? And that's a part of my faith journey. It's a part of my personal journey. It's a part of my professional journey. There's a lot that goes into that. Some of it's well publicized online, and some of it is, so these aren't like things I don't talk about publicly. But I think that if I'm being, very candid with you, it's about how I had to get honest with myself at one point in my career that the transactional nature of every conversation wasn't helpful and it was hurting relationships, personal and professional, and that it wasn't good for me or for other people. And so I really had to rethink that. And so I got help. I got coaching. I went to therapy for a while. Like I really had to be honest about this thing that I didn't like.
But it also sounds like evolution, right, of your desire to help that had to go through this, humanness and all of this other, parts of things. Do you think somebody in sales can be successful if they don't have this wiring about wanting to help people? Can people be successful in sales without that piece, or is it going to be short-term lived?
I've met lots of people who I think are pretty self-centered and successful in sales for an entire career. So I don't know that it is like have to have
There's
it.
no correlation.
Um, I don't know if there's a correlation or not. I haven't seen any science around that. What I can tell you is my own experience in this particular case is that it made selling much easier for me, and it took a lot of the pressure off of me so that I could step into sales conversations and be far more curious about what somebody wanted and needed, and be much more honest about whether or not I could help. I had a conversation yesterday where someone asked for my help, and I told them, I was like, I don't know that I'm the right guy to help you. Like, I hear the help you're wanting. I understand what you're asking for. I'm not sure that I'm the right fit. And so I think, now he's like, well, maybe we could talk about it again. It's like, sure, if you want to, that's great. I'm happy to talk again and see if I can give you some direction or point you in the right way, or if you can convince me that I'm the right fit to help you and add enough value, we can talk about that. But I don't know. Like, I don't like I really do want this guy to do well. I really do care about his success and I want him to be successful. I'm not yet convinced that what he needs is what I'm either, willing or ready to offer.
Right. Interesting. No, fascinating stuff. That's what I was very curious because you've interviewed, I mean, how many salespeople at this point? Thousands?
Thousands for sure.
Yeah, so you have a lot of experience to kind of draw on. So now with all that experience, what tips or advice do you have to CEOs that are, they're not super early, but they are growing their companies. They want to be better. They want to have more sales. Kind of what tips would you have for them when it comes to hiring people, hiring the right people um, with the right kind of behaviors? Like any wisdom you can share with us?
Yeah, I think again, have an expert plan, right? So if the methodology that I learned early in my career is around top grading, and so that was kind of what I picked up on as a way of running interviews, and then I learned a system from Dave Kurlan that I thought was really amazing, and then I read lots of books on psychology and how it played into those conversations, and then I had as you know, I have a really rigorous process when I interview executives or board directors, or I have a really rigorous process that I take people through, and I'm looking for very specific things. And the biggest comment I'll make about that is what I said earlier: interview for competency first, and then culture second. Even though I agree culture is more important, it's harder to interview for competency once you've assessed somebody as a cultural fit. Like you're going to try and shove a square peg into a round hole, and that's how a lot of mistakes get made. And so, or just using intuition. I will say this: I've met 2 or 3 managers in my career that their intuition is 100 times better than my process, and my process is pretty damn good, and they're just really naturally talented. But that's 3 executives I've met in my entire career that are better than me from a statistical standpoint. Like looking at the numbers and how they've done over their whole career versus how my process has gone, they were better. But
Yeah,
it's been very few people that are better than a process. I've seen lots of people who
that's
run a
a really
process as
helpful
well
tip.
as mine. Yeah, I'm not saying my process is the only one, or you have to use like I think a process is better than no process. That's so I'm not advocating for my process specifically. I'm just saying like a process, an expert process, and I think top grading is a great example of an expert process. That it's a little heavy, but it's really really well done. And so
It's definitely a good start. I remember that was I used that for my first house team that didn't work out. But it was good to know how to do it. And it wasn't until I kind of learned it from you how to do it right that I started
when
seeing a lot more success.
Well, and that's the difference between reading a book and actually bringing someone who's done it before, right? Like that's that
Yeah.
old 1980s movie, The Karate Kid, where the guy's trying to learn karate from a book versus learning from a teacher. Like I'm not trying to like advocate that all CEOs need a recruiter every time they go to recruit someone. I'm not saying that, but I do think that it makes sense if you want to go fast, you want to take someone who's been ahead of you on the path. That could be a mentor, it could be a coach, it could be a consultant, it could be a friend. There's lots of ways that can show up. But I
Right.
do think that there's very few things in human history that are new. Like we've done most of it before.
What are some of the things that you wish I asked you that I didn't? Anything that you were kind of prepared to talk about or wanted to talk about and I didn't ask you kind of when it comes to the topic of what we're talking about today?
Change management, I think, is one of the things I thought we might talk a little bit about. And so one of the things that I was prepared to talk about is that when you are going through change management, you're helping someone, that it's small changes that then get reinforced over time that are generally most sustainable and successful. And so when I see managers come in and they change 6 things for someone one week and they change 6 more things the next week, and then they wonder why it's not working. See the face you just made. Yeah, that's exactly. It's like, oof, that's tough, right? So it's very hard for managers, especially people who are really smart, who see all these things, to be able to prioritize all those things and pick the one highest impact thing they want to change and get it changed, and then work on the next one thing. There's only so much change that somebody can undergo in a certain time period. And so the smaller change, the faster they can make that change. And so I think if you're as you're thinking about coaching people, as you're thinking about, helping people get better, uh, maybe not fixing all of it at once. You might shine a light on things and see all the problems. That doesn't mean you have to address every single one of them today. Chances are those problems were there 2 weeks ago and last week. They were going to be here next week anyway. So pick the one thing and move it
Hmm.
forward. And pick the most important thing. Don't pick the easiest thing, or maybe you pick the easiest thing because you want to build confidence. Maybe confidence is the thing you're trying to change, so you do want to pick the smallest thing because you're trying to build confidence. But be deliberate about that.
That is definitely something that's not talked about at all. Again, people talk about the how do I do this, how do I do this, without talking about the change management. That's
Atomic
I'm
habits.
glad I'm glad you brought that up. That's the one thing. I mean, he talks about that in his book a lot about like how do you like, just take one thing and just work on that. That's also a good one.
Yep.
Any other things that you wanted to tell me or talk about that you think is maybe helpful or um, people miss a lot? Anything else before I kind of wrap this up?
I think the last thing is just that I think, for me, in my experience, is that relationships have been the thing that changed my career for the positive and allowed me to have the bandwidth, the leverage, the success. And I mean, my relationships personally and professionally, not every single person in my life had to be a prospect. I learned that it was okay that some people weren't a prospect, they were part of my personal life. And that really changed my life when I understood that I was going to have personal relationships, I was going to have mentor relationships, I was going to have professional relationships, and being able to be okay with that was a big change for me. As a guy who was, I was a very successful athlete growing up and very intense, as people who know me would tell you. And when I was able to kind of make space for the relationships, personal and professional, it had a huge positive impact in my career. And, again, I don't as you asked earlier, does it require that to be successful? I don't know that I have a good answer for that academically, but my experience has been it's made a huge difference for me. So,
Well, thank you for sharing that. I can talk to you forever. Maybe I'll bring you back if you want to come,
sure.
maybe 6 or 7 months, and we'll drill more into kind of nitty gritty of the change management and behavior. Because again, that is how you change and get better, not just hoping the next person is going to be a fix. It
Yeah.
most likely won't be.
We'll
So, what are you
encourage
excited about?
everyone to
What are you?
we'll tell everyone to leave
What do
comments. We'll
you?
come back and answer their ask me anything comments.
Yeah, exactly. What are you working on? What is exciting? How can people find you? Kind of this is the time for you to kind of tell us about like what's going on in your life and what are you
Yeah.
building? What are you working on? Any
Yeah,
kind of
sure.
how do people find you?
My consulting practice is at johnoberg.com. My medical practice is at Precina, Precina.com. And so, what I'm really excited about is helping people, defeat type 2 diabetes. Like we've done amazing things in our clinic. I'm really focused on that. I'm really focused on helping other people who want to make massive changes in the world make those changes in my consulting practice. And so, I'm focused on leaving the world a better place than I found it, and that's really what I'm working on today, and surrounding myself with people who have hope that we can leave this world a better place than we found it, and I have lots of hope about that. I have stories of hope every single day, and I wake up every morning and love the work that I do, and I feel really fortunate and blessed to be able to do the things I get to do every single day, and I work hard at it, and I have fun at, and I love the people that I'm around every day as a result of it. So,
Well, you are an encyclopedia of wisdom and knowledge. I mean, sales is just the kind of how you get people in, and then there's just so much more that you're able to share and show and like really like for me, I can't imagine like my life without you. Like you believed in me in some of the toughest times I've had before I even knew I had tough times. But you are somebody who's been consistent, and like what you say is what you are, which is always so refreshing to be around. So thank you for coming.
say for better or worse, I wear it on my
What?
sleeve.
No, this is how you do it. I mean,
Yeah,
you're never afraid to share the truth, and I think that's
yeah.
important in today's world. So I appreciate you for everything you do for everybody, for us, and I hope that we'll see you on our channel again. So stay for just one
Thanks.
minute, and I'll. Uh, all right, thanks again. Hold on.
Thanks for having me.